Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Nick DiMartino. I am back to talk to you about one of the trade deadlines because one of the trades right before the deadline. This seems to be a very big year for the trade deadlines. One of the craziest I remember in my lifetime. The Phillies they made three pretty big moves. They traded a pitching prospect named Ben Brown for David Robertson, the reliever from the Cubs. And they traded some guy named Mickey Moniak, who is an outfielder on so some guy named Mickey Moniak and Jadiel Sanchez for Noah Syndergaard from the Angels. I've never heard of either of those guys. Jadiel Sanchez is a prospect. Mickey Moniak is a player. I've never heard of him. I looked up his numbers, and now I know why. He stinks. So far, at least, he stinks. He might end up being good in the future, but he's still very young. He's only been in the league for a couple of years and hasn't played a full season. But so far, I looked at his numbers. He's not very good. And they traded, and the Phillies acquired Brandon Marsh for for a prospect named Logan O'Hop. So essentially, all the Phillies gave up were prospects, basically. They gave up prospects and one young player who isn't very good so far and doesn't play that much, who I don't think anybody outside of a Phillies fan has ever heard of. So I think it's a good move for the Phillies. Obviously, this doesn't really need to be said. I don't think anybody's like, I can't believe you got rid of Logan O'Hop and Jadiel Sanchez and Mickey Moniak. I can't believe you guys did that. I don't think anybody's saying that. I think it goes to show you the biggest difference between losing teams and winning teams. Here's what I notice about baseball. It's similar to how in the NFL and the NBA, if a team values draft picks, it means they stink. If your team values draft picks, you're not in the position you want to be. There's a reason it's been teams historically that, obviously because of the way the draft works, obviously, but there's a reason that, throughout recent years, the Knicks have primarily valued draft picks because they weren't good enough to get the superstars. They weren't a good team. They were losers for most of my life. And that's why they value draft picks. Same thing with the Jets or whatever bad NFL team you could think of that tanks every year. It's the same concept in baseball, but with prospects. There's a reason the Phillies were able to give up next to nothing other than one very young, unknown player and three prospects for three active players, because the teams they traded with suck. And it goes to show you that the Angels and Cubs are losing teams. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. Just look at their records. They're one of the worst teams. They're both one of the worst teams in baseball. But these really horrible teams always value prospects. They value prospects. They don't winning teams that are on the cusp of potentially making the playoffs, like the Phillies, don't value prospects so much. But teams like the Cubs and the Angels, they really value prospects. So that's essentially almost like the MLB's version of draft picks in a way, as it would be in the NFL and NBA. So you already know where this is going. In terms of like the teams that are on the cusp of the wild card in the NL, it's the Cardinals and the Phillies. Currently, they're tied. Those two teams are tied. I mean, the number one wild card team by far is the Braves. As much as I hate to say it, they're the number one wild card team by far. It's very unlikely that they would even be able, that the Phillies could even think of catching up to them. Even the Padres at this point seems very unlikely that the Phillies were able to catch up to them. I mean, in terms of the division, the Phillies, forget about it. Although it's a good move, I still think it's a good move because they still did better in this trade deadline than the Cardinals did. So I would say the likelihood of them winning and making the wild card is actually higher than the Cardinals because they made better. Overall, I would say they did better. They got Marsh, Syndergaard, and Robertson. That's better than the Cardinals just getting Jordan Montgomery. I don't think it's that big of a deal that the Cardinals got Jordan Montgomery. So overall, I would say the Phillies did better. I didn't realize how long the Phillies postseason drought is, it's almost as long as the Jets postseason drought. They haven't made the playoffs since 2011. So that's almost as long. The 2011 NLDS was their last playoffs appearance. So that's almost as long as the Jets, like, I mean, later on in the year, obviously, but almost as long as the Jets not being in the playoffs since the 2011 AFC Championship game. I didn't realize their drought was actually that long. But so far, I would put my money on the Phillies making the playoffs this year. I don't want them to. In terms of them, I mean, in terms of them, like, going very far in the playoffs, I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, I don't think they're at best going to be the worst playoff team in the NL. I don't see them being better than the Padres, although I guess it's possible. You never know what might happen. But the Braves, forget it. I mean, winning the division, you can forget about it. I mean, that's just not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. There's no way. I mean, think about this for a second. I mean, they got Syndergaard. Okay, that's a solid addition. Whatever. I mean, Syndergaard's not that good anymore. He's a big name, but I mean, he's not the player that he used to be. And they got Brandon Marsh, who's not really that good. I mean, he's good. He's young, but I mean, he's hitting 226 and has 8 home runs. I mean, he can't be that good. I mean, if he was on the Mets, he would bat like 7th or 8th, probably. And that's assuming that a bunch of guys are not in the lineup. And that's assuming that, at least one regular starter is not in the lineup. I mean, if you think about it, Escobar has had, of all the Mets right now, he's the only one who's having kind of a disappointing season. And Brandon Marsh would be lower in the batting order than Escobar. I mean, I'd take Escobar over Marsh even. I mean, that's the only one that's even that close. I mean, just like if he was on the Mets, he would probably bat 8th. I mean, so if this is a big acquisition for the Phillies, forget about them winning the division. It's just not going to happen. It's also interesting to me that the Angels now have 40% of their starting rotation is now ex-Mets. I think that's kind of interesting. So now Met fans, we have even more of a reason to hate Noah Syndergaard now that he's on the enemy team. But in general, I think it's good for the Phillies. It's good for their hopes of making the wild card. They're lucky that the MLB foolishly added a wild card game, by the way. And I'm not just saying that because I don't want the Phillies to make the playoffs. I'm saying that because I think it's a stupid idea. I don't think the Phillies deserve to make the playoffs, but whatever. They're going to make it now as the 7th team in the playoffs in all likelihood. But in terms of like them going very far, in terms of how it affects the Mets, which is really what I care about, I don't think it's very likely to affect the Mets very much. Maybe they're more likely to pull off a win or two. I mean, it's obviously not going to help the Mets if a division rival gets better, but I don't think it would hurt them that much, especially when whatever's going to hurt the Mets would also hurt the Braves realistically. So I don't know. I don't think it's that big of a deal in terms of the Mets and how it affects them. But it doesn't really affect the NL East that much, honestly. I mean, it's not. I mean, they were a better team than the Marlins and the Nationals, regardless. So I mean, they're still. No matter what happened, they were going to be the 3rd team in the NL East, but it's pretty big in terms of the wild card. And I think that now, because they made these moves, they're going to end up beating out the Cardinals.